Keep the ring, Adaeze. But know this, everything that glitters in this city has a price. And yours is already being collected. She laughed that day. She actually laughed. She stood in front of the mirror in Chief Emeka's Ikoyi penthouse, turning her left hand slowly in the light, watching the diamond catch the afternoon sun like a small captured star. The woman who had spoken those words, quiet, dignified, standing in the doorway in a cream Ankara blouse with not a single tremor in her voice, was Chief Emeka's wife, his real wife. And Adaeze, 23 years old, fresh-skinned and dizzy with the smell of money, had laughed her out of the room. 3 months later, she would not be laughing. 3 months later, she would be sitting on the floor of a bathroom in a rented room in Mushin, staring at a face in a cracked mirror that she no longer recognized. The glow would be gone. The ring would be gone. Chief Emeka's calls would have stopped coming, and the friends who had poured champagne on her engagement night would not be answering her calls. What happened next broke her more than losing the man ever could. Please sit back, relax, as we dive fully into this really remarkable story. Her name was Adaeze Okonkwo, and she was born in Aguda, a small, beautiful town in Imo State where the lake sat like a silver plate between the hills, and the sky was wide and unhurried. She grew up in a compound with a rusted zinc roof, and a mother who sold akara by the roadside before 6 every morning. Her father had died when she was 9. There was no insurance, no savings, only a half-built block structure he had left behind that the rain gradually reclaimed. Adaeze was not unattractive. Even as a teenager, people noticed her. She had the kind of face that made you look twice, high cheekbones, deep brown skin that caught the sun like polished wood, and large, quiet eyes that seemed to be calculating something even when she smiled. Her secondary school teachers called her sharp. Her mother called her restless. The boys in the compound called her proud. She was not proud. She was simply hungry, and she had learned early to confuse the two. When she turned 21, she wrote JAM 3 times and passed twice, but university felt like a door that kept moving further away every time she reached for it. School fees, accommodation, handouts. The gap between wanting and having was a canyon, and her mother's akara money could not bridge it. So Adaeze did what thousands of young women from Aguda and Akigwi and Abeokuta and Kogi do every year when the dream becomes too heavy to carry at home. She packed a bag and turned her face toward Lagos. Her auntie Ngozi had lived in Isle-Iko for 11 years. She was a seamstress, a good one, with a small shop near the market that smelled of fabric starch and thread. She was a sturdy, God-fearing woman who wore her faith like a second skin and kept a Bible on the sewing table between the scissors and the measuring tape. When Adaeze arrived at her doorstep in August, thin from the bus journey and bright-eyed from the skyline she had seen through the window as they crossed the bridge, Auntie Ngozi held her for a long moment and whispered something that Adaeze did not hear properly. She would understand it later. Lagos is not what it looks like from the bridge, the old woman had said. The beauty is real, but so is the depth. Adaeze nodded. She unpacked her bag, she helped in the shop, she swept, she pressed fabrics, she watched the street from the doorway. And she waited. She found a job after 6 weeks, a receptionist position at a hair salon in Lekki Phase 1. The salon was called Mystique, and it was the kind of place that made Adaeze feel like she had walked into a magazine. The walls were rose gold. The chairs were white leather. The customers arrived in cars that cost more than Auntie Ngozi's entire street. They spoke in the clipped, careless English of people who had never had to choose between eating and paying rent. Adaeze watched them the way a woman who has been standing outside in the cold watches a fire, not with malice, with longing. She was good at her job. She smiled well. She remembered names. She wore her uniform with the precision of someone who understood that presentation was its own currency. Her manager, a sharp Yoruba woman named Said, told her after 3 weeks, "You carry yourself well, this one. You'll go far depending on which road you choose." She didn't understand that either, not yet. She first saw Madame Chidinma on a Thursday afternoon in October. The woman pulled up in a deep red Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the kind of car that didn't ask for attention, it simply commanded it. She stepped out wearing a caramel-colored blazer over a silk camisole, straight-leg trousers, and kitten heels the color of bone. She was perhaps 45, but she wore it the way certain women do, not fighting the years, simply outranking them. Her jewelry was understated. Her perfume arrived before she did. She was a regular at Mystique, but Adaeze had never attended to her personally until that day, when the receptionist ahead of her called in sick. "You're new," Madame Chidinma said, not unkindly, as Adaeze offered her a seat and a glass of chilled water. "I've been here 3 months, Ma," Adaeze said. The woman looked at her, really looked, the way people rarely bother to look at receptionists. She tilted her head slightly, as if reading something written in a language she recognized. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Aguda, IMO State." Madame Chidinma smiled. It was a slow, knowing smile. "IMO girls," she said softly. "You people always have something behind your eyes." Adaeze did not know whether it was a compliment. She said thank you anyway. By the time Madame Chidinma left the salon 2 hours later, she had pressed a complimentary card into Adaeze's palm. It was thick, cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering that read simply, Chidinma Akaffer, Events and Brand Consultancy. Below the name, a personal number. "Call me if you ever want to be more than a receptionist," the woman said, sliding her sunglasses on. "You have the look, you only lack the direction." She walked out. The red Mercedes purred away from the curb. Adaeze stood at the door, holding the card in both hands, and something shifted quietly inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She waited 2 weeks before calling. She rehearsed what she would say. She called on a Saturday morning, standing outside in Auntie Ngozie's small yard, away from the sound of the sewing machine. Madame Chidinma answered on the second ring, as if she had been expecting it. "I wondered when you would call," she said warmly. "Come for lunch, Victoria Island. I'll send the address." The restaurant was called 17, and it sat on the waterfront like a secret. The walls were glass. The tablecloths were linen. A pianist played something European in the corner. Adaeze arrived in her best dress, a green bodycon she had bought secondhand from Yaba Market and ironed 3 times that morning, and felt, for the first time in Lagos, both deeply out of place and desperately certain that this was exactly where she wanted to belong. Madame Chidinma was already seated. She had brought a friend, another woman, introduced as Tati, who worked in finance, and wore a watch that Adaeze would later learn cost more than a year of her salary. They were kind. They were curious. They ordered for her without being patronizing about it, and by the second course, Adaeze had laughed genuinely 3 times. "You see," Madame Chidinma said over dessert, leaning forward slightly, "Lagos does not reward suffering. It rewards presence. It rewards the women who know how to be somewhere and make people feel something." "She's right," Tati agreed, examining her wine glass with a casual elegance. "The women who struggle here are the ones who were taught that struggle is noble. It isn't. It's just painful." Adaeze nodded. She was listening with every part of herself. "There are men in this city," Madame Chidinma continued, dropping her voice just slightly, pleasantly, "the way one shares useful information, not scandal, powerful men who appreciate company, intelligent company, beautiful company. They are generous. They are discreet, and they ask very little." A quiet settled over the table. Adaeze knew, in some deep and honest part of herself, what was being said. She had heard versions of this story from girls back in Aguda who came back from Lagos, wearing things their mothers could not afford to buy. She had told herself she was different. But the restaurant was very beautiful, and the food was extraordinary. And Madame Chidinma's watch caught the light, and Tati's laughter was easy and bright, and Adaeze was 22 years old and tired, so tired of watching other people's fire from outside in the cold. "I'm listening," she said. And the storm had already begun, and it was silent. What followed was not dramatic. That was perhaps the most dangerous thing about it. It happened gradually, the way a tide comes in, not rushing, not announcing itself, simply advancing until the ground you were standing on is no longer dry. Madame Chidinma was patient. She was, Adaeze would later understand, a woman of considerable strategic intelligence who had simply chosen to apply it to this particular enterprise. She did not push. She curated. First came the wardrobe, not a gift, not initially. Madame Chidinma simply began taking Adaeze to certain shops in Lekki and Honoru, pointing at things, explaining fabrics, commenting on silhouette and occasion. This one is for a dinner. This one is for being seen in the afternoon. This one, she held up a particular midnight blue wrap dress. This one is for making a man forget what he was about to say. Then came the education in manners. Which fork? How to order wine without reading the list too carefully. How to laugh without seeming delighted. How to sit in a room full of wealth without performing wonder. Then came the events. Small ones at first, private birthday dinners, gallery openings, rooftop cocktail parties where men in agbada and good watches circulated like well-dressed weather systems. Adaeze attended as Madame Chidinma's associate. She was always introduced carefully, always presented as someone interesting, someone adjacent to industry, a curated mystery. She stopped working at the salon after the 4th month. She sent money home to her mother and told her she had gotten a better job. She stopped going to Auntie Ngozie's house as often. The distance between Isle Eco and Victoria Island was not just geography. It was everything. Chief Emeka Duru came into her orbit on a rainy Friday evening at a private dinner in a penthouse in Eco Atlantic. That vast, artificial land pulled up from the ocean by ambition and capital, where new money and old power ate together over candlelight. He was 54. He wore a charcoal agbada with gold embroidery that was restrained enough to be expensive rather than merely loud. He was not tall, but he held himself with the particular stillness of a man who has not needed to prove anything in a very long time. His eyes were sharp and amused, the eyes of a man who was accustomed to seeing through things, including people. He was the kind of man who, in a room full of conversation, would notice the one person who was listening instead of speaking. Adaeze was listening. He came to her. They talked about nothing, about the rain, about a film she had seen, about a book she had read 3 years ago in Aguda that she had never expected to find herself discussing over champagne on an artificial island. He was smart. He was charming in the specific way of men who have chosen charm as a tool rather than a trait. And he looked at her the way Madame Chidinma had predicted a certain kind of man would look at her, with assessment disguised as admiration. He asked for her number before the evening ended. She gave it to him. That night, in the car back to the apartment, Madame Chidinma had quietly helped her rent in Surulere, a step up from Auntie Ngozie's compound, but several steps below Eco Atlantic. Adaeze sat in the back seat and looked out at the Lagos night and told herself that she was in control, that she was making a choice, that this was strategic, that she was not Adaeze from Aguda anymore, that girl who watched other people's fires from outside in the cold. She believed every word of it. She was very young, and youth, when it is paired with hunger, has a remarkable capacity for believing exactly what it needs to believe. Chief Emeka called the next morning. His first words were, "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said about that book." She smiled at the phone in the quiet of her small apartment. She did not know that 40 kilometers away, in a 7-bedroom home in Banana Island, a woman named Mrs. Nneka Duru was already watching, already knowing, already deciding, not with rage, but with the extraordinary patience of a woman who had been here before and understood exactly how this particular story ended. Mrs. Nneka Duru had been Chief Emeka's wife for 22 years. She had watched this film so many times, she knew the dialogue before it was spoken. She was not afraid of Adaeze. She was waiting, quietly, the way the deep water waits for the right moment to speak. And when she did, Adaeze would laugh. Chief Emeka Duru was, by every visible measure, a generous man. Within the first month of knowing Adaeze, he had upgraded her Surulere apartment to a 2-bedroom flat in Lekki Phase 1, cream walls, tiled floors that caught the light, a balcony that looked over a quiet street lined with mango trees. He furnished it himself, or rather, he sent someone to furnish it, which was perhaps the first indication of how their arrangement would work. He did not ask what she liked. He decided what she would have. And because what he decided was beautiful, she did not notice the difference between generosity and control. The flat came with a monthly allowance deposited the first of every month without fail. A sleek burgundy Honda Accord that appeared in the compound one Saturday morning with a small bow tied to the steering wheel and a card that said simply, "For my Ada." There were dinners at restaurants where the menus had no prices. There were weekends in Abuja when Chief had business, and she traveled with him as his personal assistant, a title that satisfied hotel check-in desks and nobody else. She wore it all like a second skin. The girl who had ironed a green bodycon dress 3 times before a lunch she could barely afford was now sliding into booths at Numero Sink in a shimmering champagne 2-piece that Madame Chidinma had helped her select on a Tuesday afternoon like it was nothing. Like Tuesday afternoons had always smelled of designer fabric and dry champagne. She sent money home every month, more than her mother had ever seen at once. She told her she was doing well in marketing. Her mother prayed for her on the phone every Sunday, thanking God in a voice so full of relief and gratitude that Adaeze always ended the call quickly, always found something suddenly urgent to attend to after they hung up. The guilt was manageable. She managed it the way you manage a small fire in a room with good ventilation, by making sure there was always enough air moving to keep it from becoming a problem. What she did not see, because she was not yet equipped to see it, was the architecture of the cage being built around her. It was elegant architecture. That was the thing about Chief Emeka. He was not a brutal man. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He controlled the way very intelligent and very wealthy men control, through access, through the gradual, gentle repositioning of what you believe you are capable of without them. He would cancel plans at the last minute without explanation, and the cancellation would come with a gift, a bracelet, a spa day, so that the lesson absorbed was not this man is unreliable, but rather disappointment in this world comes with compensation. He would ask, casually, why she was still talking to a particular friend from the salon, and the question would be wrapped in concern. "That one doesn't look like your level again, Ada. You've moved." Until slowly, quietly, the friend stopped being called, and the silence where she used to be filled with one of Madame Chidinma's circle instead. He did not like her visiting Auntie Ngozi. He never said so directly. He would simply schedule something, a dinner, a trip, an event, on the days she mentioned going to Isle Eco, and after enough rescheduling, the visits became rare, and then rarer, and then she stopped mentioning them at all, and the old woman in the small shop with the Bible on the sewing table became a figure from a life that felt increasingly theoretical. Adaeze told herself she was evolving. She was disappearing, but it felt like the same thing at the speed she was moving. She had known about Mrs. Nneka Duru from the beginning. Madame Chidinma had been straightforward, refreshingly, almost clinically so. "He is married, 22 years, 3 children, all in university abroad. The wife knows about the arrangement. These things in Lagos, you understand, they have their rhythm." Adaeze had told herself she was not naive. She had filed the information in the part of her mind reserved for uncomfortable truths that did not require immediate action, and she had continued. She had never expected to meet her. It happened on a Wednesday, 4 months into the relationship. Adaeze had gone to the mall in Victoria Island, Palms, for what she thought was a quiet afternoon alone, a rare thing Chief Emeka permitted her to have. She was standing at a counter in a skincare shop, testing a serum on the inside of her wrist, when she became aware that someone had stopped beside her. She looked up. The woman was perhaps late 40s. She was not dressed dramatically, a well-cut white linen tunic over wide-legged trousers the color of sand, low-heeled sandals, a single gold chain at the throat. Her hair was natural, low, and immaculate. She was beautiful in the way that money and time and peace of mind can make a woman beautiful, not artificially, but settled, like something that has found its proper form. She looked at Adaeze with an expression that was neither angry nor warm. It was simply clear. The expression of a person who sees exactly what they are looking at and has decided to speak plainly. "You are Adaeze," she said, not a question. Adeeze's hand stilled on the counter. Yes. "I am Nneka Duru," the woman said. "I believe you know my husband." The shop assistant had drifted to the other end of the counter, with the practiced discretion of someone who understood that certain conversations required space. Adaeze straightened. She had rehearsed, somewhere in the back of her imagination, a version of this moment, and in every version she had been assured, even dismissive. But standing here in person, before this woman whose stillness was like a physical force, all the rehearsed assurance dissolved quietly. "I meant to," she began. "You don't need to explain," Mrs. Nneka said, and there was no cruelty in it. "I am not here to cause a scene. I am not that kind of woman, and you will discover that about me." She paused, looking at Adaeze with that same unnerving clarity. "I only want to tell you one thing, and you can do with it whatever you choose." Adaeze waited. "Emeka has done this before," Mrs. Nneka said quietly. "3 times that I know of properly, possibly more. Each time he chooses a young woman who wants things. He gives her those things, and while she is busy receiving them, she does not notice that she is being used as a temporary distraction and nothing more. Not a future. A distraction." She paused again. "He will never leave me. Not because I hold him, I do not hold anyone. But because everything he is, his company, his standing, his family name, his access to the people who actually matter in this city, is woven through 22 years of my own labor. He knows that. On his clearest days, he knows that." She picked up the same serum Adaeze had been testing, examined it with mild interest, and set it down. "You seem intelligent," she said. "More intelligent than the others. That is the only reason I am saying this to you, and not simply waiting. You still have a life ahead of you that could be entirely your own. Don't spend it on borrowed time in someone else's story." She looked at her directly, one last time. Leave while leaving is still a choice. Then she turned and walked away, unhurried, unperturbed, her sandals quiet on the marble floor. Adaeze stood at the counter for a long moment, the serum still on her wrist, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The silence in the wake of that woman spoke louder than any confrontation. She told herself on the drive home that it had been a manipulation, a performance, the desperate play of a woman who felt her position threatened. She told herself this with the particular conviction of someone who needs very much for a thing to be true. By the time she pulled into her compound in Lekki, she had almost convinced herself. That evening, Chief Emeka called. His voice was warm, familiar, slightly distracted in the way of a man with many plates spinning. He told her he missed her. He said he would come Friday. He said he had something for her, something to make you smile, my Ada. She laughed at something he said. She made her voice light and warm. She did not mention the mall. She did not mention Nneka. And by the time Friday came, with its gifts and its candlelight and its deliberate seductions, the afternoon in the skincare shop had been folded away into the same drawer as the other uncomfortable truths, closed, but not empty. It was 6 months into the relationship when the ring appeared. The evening had been elaborate, more so than usual. Chief Emeka had taken her to a private dinner on a boat chartered for the evening, just the 2 of them and staff, anchored somewhere on Lagos Harbor, where the city's lights reflected on the dark water like a second, more beautiful city built underneath the real one. The table had orchids. There was a live saxophonist, which Adaeze found slightly theatrical but which moved her nonetheless. The food was extraordinary. The wine made the air feel warmer than it was. Chief Emeka was charming that night in a way that felt different from his usual charm, softer, more deliberate. He told her things about his childhood in Enugu that she had not heard before. He asked about her mother, about Aguda, and he listened to her answers with a quality of attention that she had been quietly starving for. He made her feel, in that curated and glittering atmosphere, that she was seen, not as a beautiful young woman he kept in a flat in Lekki, but as a person of weight and substance. She would understand later that this was the most expensive thing he had ever given her. Not the ring, the feeling. When he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small velvet box, Adaeze felt the world tilt slightly, the way the horizon moves when the boat shifts. She opened it. The diamond was serious, not ostentatious but unambiguous, the kind of stone that required no commentary. It sat in platinum, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the harbor lights and scattered them in every direction. I want you to be mine properly, he said. His voice was low and certain. No more of this half-half arrangement. I am taking steps. This is my promise to you. Steps. The word was deliberately vague. She would realize later, a door without a frame. But in that moment, on the water, with the saxophonist playing something achingly romantic and the city lights trembling on the harbor, she heard only what she needed to hear. She let him slide the ring onto her finger. She told herself this was the arrival she had been moving toward since she stepped off that bus and saw Lagos from the bridge for the first time. She told herself that Mrs. Nneka's quiet words in the mall had been exactly what she dismissed them, as the last maneuver of a woman losing ground. She told herself she had won. She photographed the ring that night in the boat's bathroom, the diamond catching the light just so, and sent it to Madame Chidinma. The reply came in seconds, 3 fire emojis, and then, I told you, this is your season, my dear. She sent it to Titi, who replied with a string of exclamation marks and a voice note of screaming. She did not send it to Auntie Ngozi. She did not send it to her mother. Some part of her, the part that still lived in a compound with a rusted zinc roof and knew the smell of her mother's hands, understood that this victory could not travel home, that it would not survive the journey. She pushed that part down. She was getting very good at that. She wore the ring to the next event Madame Chidinma hosted, a rooftop cocktail gathering in Ikoyi. The Lagos evening spread golden and hazy behind the skyline. The women in Madame Chidinma's circle examined it, exclaimed over it, asked questions with eyes that contained their own calculations. The men noticed it the way men in those circles notice such things, with a slight recalibration of who she was in the room. She was radiant that night, the most radiant she had ever been. She wore a deep burgundy dress with a halter neck, her hair pinned up, the ring catching light every time she lifted her glass. People told her she was glowing. She believed them. She did not notice that across the rooftop, a woman she did not recognize was watching her with an expression that was not jealousy, not admiration, something quieter and more careful than either. She did not notice. But across the city, in the Banana Island house that bore the Duru name on the gate, Mrs. Nneka was sitting in her reading chair with a phone to her ear, speaking in a low, steady voice, the way a person speaks when they have made a decision. I gave her the chance, she said quietly to whoever was on the other end. She made her choice. She set the phone down. She opened her book. She continued reading. Outside the Banana Island house, the Lagos night was warm and humming. The water lay flat and dark beyond the walls. And on the rooftop in Ikoyi, Adaeze laughed at something bright, uninhibited, the laughter of a woman who believes she is standing on solid ground. The ring caught the light. And somewhere, in the deep and patient logic of consequences, something that had been waiting quietly all along finally turned its face toward her. The first sign came 9 days after the rooftop party. She woke at 3 a.m. to a strange heat on her skin, not the heat of the Lagos night, which she knew, which was familiar and damp. This was different, interior, as if something beneath the surface was being disturbed. She went to the bathroom and turned on the light. She stood at the mirror for a long time. Her face, her beautiful, high-cheeked, polished wood face, had erupted overnight along the jawline in a way she had never experienced before. Not ordinary breakouts, something angrier, something that seemed, in the harsh bathroom light, to have intention. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was the champagne, the change in weather, a reaction to a new product. She told herself there was a rational explanation and she would see a dermatologist in the morning. She turned off the bathroom light and went back to bed. In the dark, the ring on her finger caught nothing because there was no light. It sat on her hand, silent and heavy, and the room was very quiet around her. By morning, the eruption had spread. And Chief Emeka's calls, which came every day without fail since that boat dinner 6 months ago, did not come that morning. Or the morning after. The dermatologist in Lekki was a quiet, precise man who had seen everything Lagos skin could produce. Heat rash, stress eruptions, allergic reactions, the particular damage that harmattan and pollution and sleeplessness could inflict on a face. He examined Adaeze with a small light and a magnifying lens and asked careful questions about her diet, her products, her stress levels, her sleep. He prescribed 3 things. He told her to return in 2 weeks. She returned in 2 weeks, and he looked at her face with an expression he quickly composed into professionalism, but not quickly enough. She had seen it. The small, involuntary pause, the recalibration behind his eyes. The condition had not responded to treatment. If anything, it had advanced, spreading now beyond the jawline to her cheeks, changing in character, no longer simply angry but deeply settled, as if it had decided to stay. Her skin, which had always been her most reliable asset, smooth, even, luminous, was becoming a landscape she no longer recognized. There were patches of discoloration, a persistent swelling along the left side of her face that came and went without pattern. A texture that no foundation in her considerable collection could fully navigate. He referred her to a specialist. He used careful language. He did not speculate. She drove home from the clinic and sat in the parking lot of her building for 40 minutes without going inside. She had not heard from Chief Emeka in 11 days. She told herself the silence had an explanation. He was busy. She knew his schedule could swallow weeks whole. He had traveled to Abuja, perhaps. There was a business matter. These things happened. She had his number, and she had always been careful not to be the woman who called too many times, who showed need too openly. Madam Chidinma had been very clear on that particular point. Neediness is the fastest way to make a powerful man feel trapped, she had said once, over lunch, with the casual authority of someone delivering established science. So Adaeze did not call. She waited. She tended to her skin with the new prescriptions. She concealed what she could. She went about her days with the practiced composure of a woman who has learned that performance is its own form of survival. On the 12th day she called. It rang out. On the 13th day she called again. This time it rang twice and stopped, the particular brevity of a call that has been seen and declined. She set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood very still, looking out the window at the mango tree street below, and felt something she had been carefully managing since the boat dinner began to move in her chest like water finding the cracks in a wall. She called Madam Chidinma instead. Madam Chidinma answered, but her voice had a quality Adaeze had not heard before, a slight distance, as if she were speaking from behind something transparent but solid. Ada, how are you? Warmth but measured. I've been trying to reach Chief, Adaeze said, keeping her voice even. He's not. These men, Madam Chidinma said, with a short, sympathetic sound. You know how it gets. Quarter-end board meetings, Emeka has a lot moving right now. Give him space, he'll surface. It's been almost 2 weeks, madam. A pause, brief but present. Ada, I'll be honest with you because I care about you. This is not a moment to be pressing. Let him breathe. Men like Emeka, the more you reach, the further they go. Just be calm, focus on yourself. Focus on yourself, said with kindness. But underneath it, Adaeze heard something else, the sound of a door being quietly, politely eased shut. Is there something I should know? Adaeze asked directly. Another pause, this one slightly longer. Just give it time, my dear. These things have their seasons. They ended the call. Adaeze held the phone for a moment, then set it down. These things have their seasons. She went to the bathroom. She stood at the mirror. The left side of her face had swollen again overnight, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to be undeniable. Enough to be the first thing anyone would notice. She thought of the boat, the harbor lights, the saxophonist, the velvet box. She thought of Mrs. Nneka standing in the skincare shop. Leave, while leaving is still a choice. She turned off the bathroom light. Shame is like a hand closing around your throat. It does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes in the dark, in private, in the moment between looking in a mirror and looking away. Chief Emeka called on the 16th day. She almost did not recognize the version of him in the call. He was not cruel. She almost wished he had been. Cruelty would have given her something to push against, something to build a response from. Instead, he was measured and reasonable and distant in the way of a man who has already emotionally concluded something and is now simply administering the paperwork. "Ada," he said, "I think we need to be honest with each other." She said nothing. She had learned that silence sometimes forces the other person to carry the full weight of what they are saying. "I care about you," he continued. "That has not changed, but I've been thinking, and I think the arrangement we have, where we are, it's not fair to you. You deserve someone who can give you their full self. A young woman like you should not be waiting on a man who has obligations elsewhere." She noticed he did not mention the ring. He had given her a ring, and he was now speaking as if it had never happened, as if the boat and the orchids and the saxophonist had been a pleasant evening between friends and nothing more consequential than that. "The ring," she said quietly, the first words she had spoken in the call. A silence on his end, brief and uncomfortable. "Ada." "You put a ring on my finger," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "You told me you were taking steps. Those were your words, steps." "I know what I said." His voice had the particular flatness of a man who has been caught in something he cannot elegantly exit. "And I meant it in that moment. But there are complications. Family matters. I cannot go into details, but I need you to understand that this is not about you." Not about you. The sentence that has ended 1,000 things while pretending to be an absolution. "Is it because of my face?" she asked. She had not planned to ask it. It came from somewhere unguarded, somewhere below the composure she had been maintaining like a second job. The silence that followed that question was the most honest thing he had said in the entire call. "Of course not," he said, too late by half a second. She understood then, fully, without any remaining room for the comfortable lies she had been telling herself. The silence had answered. The half-second had answered. He was a man who kept beautiful things around him the way certain people keep expensive art, for the pleasure of possession, for what it communicated about him to the world. And she had developed a condition that compromised the art. It was, to him, as simple and as cold as that. "Keep the ring," he said, and she recognized the words with a bolt of nauseating clarity. "Keep the ring. Keep the ring," the same words she had heard before, spoken by a different mouth, in a skincare shop in Victoria Island. "Keep it. Keep the ring, Adaeze." Mrs. Nneka had known. She had known exactly how this script was written, and she had read Adaeze the ending, and Adaeze had laughed. The laughter felt, now, like a wound she had inflicted on herself. "I have to go," she said. She ended the call. She placed the phone on the kitchen counter. She looked at the ring on her finger, the serious diamond, the platinum band, the smaller stones arranged around it like an audience. She took it off. She set it on the counter beside the phone. She did not cry immediately. She stood very still, looking at the ring and the phone on the counter, and outside the window the mango trees were quiet in the morning air, and Lagos continued its enormous indifferent noise beyond them, and she felt something she had not felt since she was 9 years old and her father did not come home. She felt the ground simply stop being there. She called to tea 3 days after Chief Emeka's call. She needed to talk. She realized with some difficulty, a friend, something she had been systematically divested of over the past year without fully noticing the process. Titi answered, but her voice carried the same quality Madame Chidinma's had, that transparent but solid distance. "Ada, how are you? It's been—" "I need to see you," Adaeze said. "Something has happened. I could use some company." A pause, the sound of Titi moving somewhere, closing a door. "What's going on?" "Emeka ended things. And there's something happening with my health, my skin, my face. I've been to the dermatologist and—" "Oh no," Titi said. The sympathy was present but thin, like fabric washed too many times. "I'm so sorry, Ada. These things happen, you know how it is." "Can we meet? Lunch or just—" "This week is honestly mad for me," Titi said. "I have a thing in Abuja Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday I have— Listen, let me check my calendar and send you a message, okay? But please take care of yourself. See a good doctor. You'll be fine." She did not send a message. Adaeze called 2 more women from Madame Chidinma's circle, women who had exclaimed over her ring, who had laughed with her at rooftop parties, who had told her she was glowing. One did not answer. One answered and was warm and brief and concluded the call in 4 minutes. She understood then the specific geometry of the world she had entered. These were not friendships. They were adjacencies, arrangements of mutual proximity that served a social function and dissolved cleanly when the function no longer applied. She had mistaken the warmth of the circuit for something deeper. She had confused being included for being known. She called Madame Chidinma last. Madame Chidinma, to her credit, was honest. She was sitting. Adaeze could hear the sounds of a restaurant around her, and she spoke with the brisk compassion of a woman who has had this particular conversation before. Ada, I am going to be straight with you because I have always respected your intelligence. In the world we move in, perception is currency. When a man like Emeka steps back, people notice. And when there is also, she paused delicately, a visible health issue, it creates a narrative that is difficult for everyone around you. It is not personal. It is simply how these circles operate. So you are all going to disappear, Adaeze said flatly. Madame Chidinma did not deny it. I think you should take some time for yourself, focus on your health, when things stabilize. When things stabilize, Adaeze repeated. Yes. Things stabilize or my face stabilizes. A pause. Ada. Thank you, madam, she said, for everything. She ended the call. She sat in the flat that Chief Emeka paid for, that she now understood she could no longer afford alone, and looked at the cream walls and the tiled floors that caught the light and the balcony with the mango tree view, and she understood with the particular clarity that only complete exposure can produce that she had built nothing. She had been housed in someone else's structure and had called it home. She had been included in someone else's world and had called it belonging. She had received someone else's ring and had called it a future. And now the structure was being reclaimed, and she was standing in it with nothing that was actually hers. She lasted 3 more weeks in the Lekki flat. She spent them trying, applying for jobs with a CV that had a 2-year gap she could not honestly explain, reaching out to old contacts from the salon days who received her warmly, but had nothing to offer, visiting 2 more specialists who gave her treatments that slowed the progression of her skin condition, but did not reverse it, and who, when pressed, admitted that stress was almost certainly a significant factor in both its onset and its persistence. She called the landlord's representative. The rent, which she had never paid directly, which had always simply been handled, was due in 6 weeks. The amount was a number she could not access. She sold the Honda Accord through a dealer who gave her 60% of its value because she needed the money and had no time to negotiate. She sold pieces of jewelry, not the engagement ring, which she put in a small envelope at the bottom of her bag without examining her reasons for keeping it. She sold shoes, bags, things that had been given to her as extensions of a life that had now retracted itself entirely. She found a room in Mushin. Single room, shared bathroom, a window that faced another building's wall. The landlord asked for 6 months up front. She paid it. She moved her things in a single taxi on a Thursday morning, the city going about its business around her with absolute unconcern. She made 4 trips up the stairs. On the last trip, she stood in the doorway of the small room with the last bag in her hand and looked at the space. Its honesty, its smallness, the cracked mirror on the wall above the sink, and something inside her that had been held at great tension for a very long time simply released. Not peacefully, with pain. The way a wound releases when the pressure that has been suppressing it is finally removed, first comes the rush, and the rush is not comfortable. She sat on the edge of the single bed in the small room in Mushin, and she wept. Not the composed, controlled emotional release of someone managing their image, but the deep, ungoverned weeping of a person who has finally stopped pretending, to herself, to the room, to the cracked mirror on the wall. She wept for the girl who had arrived in Lagos hungry and bright-eyed and had mistaken hunger for direction. She wept for her mother's voice on Sunday phone calls, full of relief and gratitude built on a foundation of careful lies. She wept for Auntie Ngozi's Bible on the sewing table and the warning she had received in the compound on her first night. Lagos is not what it looks like from the bridge, that she had filed away and never returned to. She wept for Mrs. Nneka, standing in the skincare shop with her clear eyes and her quiet dignity, offering a door out of a burning building, and for the version of herself that had laughed. She wept until there was nothing left to weep with, and then she lay back on the single bed in the small, honest room, and she stared at the ceiling and she breathed. Outside, Lagos continued. Buses and generators and the calls of street vendors and the enormous, indifferent, magnificent noise of a city that had never promised her anything except the consequences of her own choices. The storm had come. It had not been loud. It had been the quiet kind, the kind that moves through a life's interior and leaves nothing standing that was not built on something real. She reached into the bag beside the bed. She found the small envelope. She held it without opening it. Then she found her phone, and she scrolled to a name she had not pressed in over 8 months. Auntie Ngozi. It rang twice. Ada, the old woman's voice, immediate, present, warm with something that had nothing to do with what Adaeze could offer her. Simply warm because she was Adaeze, because she had always been Adaeze, because that had never changed regardless of the Honda Accord or the Lecky flat or the ring in the envelope. Auntie, she said. Her voice broke cleanly on the second syllable. Auntie, I need to come home. A pause, brief and full. Come, Auntie Ngozi said simply. I am here, come. She arrived at Auntie Ngozi's compound in Isle Eco on a Friday evening with one bag, and a face that the old woman looked at for only a moment before looking away, not from disgust, but from the particular grief of someone who had seen the damage coming and could not stop it. Auntie Ngozi did not ask questions that night. She heated food. She made a bed. She sat with Adaeze in the small parlor under the yellow light with the Bible on the side table, and she simply stayed, the way certain people can stay with you in a room without requiring anything from you, without needing the silence to be explained or the damage to be accounted for. Before she slept, Adaeze asked, quietly, not looking at her aunt, Did you know? When I was here before, did you know what would happen? Auntie Ngozi was quiet for a moment. I did not know the details, she said, but I know Lagos, and I know what hunger looks like when it has not yet learned the difference between fast food and a proper meal. She paused. Fast things fill you quickly, Ada, but they do not build you, and when they are gone, they leave you more empty than before. Adaeze nodded slowly. Sleep, Auntie Ngozi said. Tomorrow we begin. She did not ask what they were beginning. She understood that it was everything, and that it would be slow, and that slow was the only kind that lasted. In the morning, Auntie Ngozi placed the Bible on the kitchen table between them over tea, and opened it and began. And for the first time in 2 years, Adaeze did not look for the door. Rebuilding does not look the way people imagine it will. In the stories we tell ourselves about transformation, there is usually a moment, cinematic, clean, flooded with light, where the person who is broken becomes the person who is whole. A single morning where they wake up different. A conversation that rearranges everything. A door that opens and the light that falls through it is new. The truth of it is quieter and considerably less comfortable than that. For Adaeze, rebuilding looked like waking at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of Auntie Ngozi's alarm and the smell of the kerosene stove being lit in the small kitchen. It looked like sitting across from the old woman over tea that was too sweet, reading passages from a book she had once found irrelevant, finding that the irrelevance had been her own, that the words had simply been waiting for her to arrive at the kind of emptiness that makes a person willing to be filled by something other than appetite. It looked like helping in the shop, folding fabric, threading needles, receiving customers with a face she was still ashamed of, watching their eyes make the brief involuntary calculation that faces make when they encounter something unexpected, and then watching them look away, and learning to let them look away, and finding slowly that the looking away hurt less each time. Not because she had stopped caring, but because she was beginning to understand that her value had never actually resided in her face. She had simply been living in a world that insisted it did, and she had believed it because belief was easier than the alternative. The skin condition was responding, incrementally, to a new treatment protocol that a doctor at a public hospital in Lagos Island had prescribed, a doctor who saw 40 patients before lunch and had none of the polished patience of the Lekki specialist, but who looked at her file with sharp, experienced eyes and said, "This is stress-driven. Significantly, whatever is causing the stress, remove it. Nothing I give you will work properly until you do." She had removed it, not in a single act of will, but through the slow attrition of distance from the world of Madame Chidinma and rooftop parties and men who gave rings on boats and reclaimed them in phone calls. Every week she stayed in Auntie Ngozie's compound was a week further from the version of herself that had been assembled in that world. And as the distance grew, the inflammation along her jawline began, tentatively, then with increasing commitment, to retreat. The body, it turns out, is a remarkably honest narrator. It will tell you what the mind has decided to manage into silence, and when you begin to listen, it begins, cautiously, to heal. She called her mother 6 weeks after moving into Auntie Ngozie's compound. She had been preparing for the call the way you prepare for something that requires courage, not rehearsing exactly, but sitting with it, turning it over, finding the words that were true rather than the words that were safe. Her mother deserved truth. She had been receiving safety for 2 years, carefully packaged, affectionately delivered safety, and she deserved better than that. The call was a Sunday. Her mother answered on the first ring, the way she always did, as if she had been expecting it precisely. "Ada, my daughter, how are you? How is the marketing work?" The marketing work. The comfortable fiction that had been running for 2 years, like a quiet engine in the background of every Sunday call. "Mama," Adaeze said. She stopped. She started again. "Mama, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I finish, because if I stop, I might not start again." A pause on the line. Her mother's breathing, familiar, close, suddenly the most real thing in the world. "I am listening," her mother said quietly. And Adaeze told her. Not everything, some things were too detailed, too particular, too dependent on a world her mother had never seen and did not need to be made to see fully. But the essential shape of it, that the money had not come from marketing, that she had made choices in Lagos that she was ashamed of, that a man had been involved, a wealthy man, and she had told herself comfortable things about what it was and what it meant, and the comfortable things had not been true. That she was now in Auntie Ngozie's house, that her face had been unwell but was getting better, that she was sorry, not the performed sorry of social repair, but the deep, specific sorry of a daughter who understands that her mother's prayers on Sunday mornings had been answered with fabrications. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. She had expected tears. She had expected, perhaps, the particular anguish that Nigerian mothers are capable of, the cry that contains within it the weight of sacrifice and hope and disappointment and love all compressed together. Instead, her mother said, in a voice that was very steady and very tired and very full, "I knew, Ada." Adaeze went still. "A mother always knows," her mother said. "Not the details, but I know my child. I know when her voice is carrying something heavy. I have been praying every morning, not just Sunday, that God would bring you back before the thing you were carrying became too heavy to walk with." A silence opened between them, warm and painful and necessary. "Come home," her mother said. "Not forever if you don't want, but come and let me see your face. Come and let me feed you. Come and remind yourself where you started so you know what you are building toward." Adaeze pressed her hand over her eyes. The mango trees outside Auntie Ngozie's compound were bright in the Sunday morning light. A generator hummed somewhere down the street. Lagos moved and breathed beyond the walls. "I will come," she said. "Soon, I promise, and this time I mean the promise." Her mother prayed over her before they ended the call, the long, specific, unhurried prayer of a woman who has been doing this faithfully for years and is simply continuing, undeterred by the distance or the difficulty. Adaeze sat through it with her eyes closed and did not rush it, did not find something suddenly urgent to attend to after the Amen. She sat with it, she let it land. 3 months into her time at Auntie Ngozie's compound, something shifted in the quality of Adaeze's days. Not dramatically, She had learned by now to be suspicious of drama, to understand that the things that announce themselves loudly are rarely the things that last. But something quieter than drama, a reorientation. She had always been intelligent. That part had never been the question. The question had always been what she aimed the intelligence at, and for 2 years she had aimed it at the intricate, exhausting work of maintaining a performance, at calculating the correct emotional register for every room she entered, at reading men like Chief Emeka the way a chess player reads a board, always 3 moves ahead, always managing the narrative. She had been working very hard. She had simply been working on the wrong thing. Auntie Ngozi, who was sharper than her small compound and simple life suggested, noticed the intelligence early and refused to let it sit idle. She put Adaeze in charge of the shop's accounts, a task that had previously been managed with a ledger and considerable guesswork. Within 2 weeks, Adaeze had reorganized the records, identified 3 areas of consistent overspending, and renegotiated the arrangement with the fabric supplier who had been, as she put it diplomatically to her aunt, taking advantage of the fact that you are too kind to push back. Auntie Ngozi had looked at her over the reorganized ledger with an expression that contained pride in something else, recognition, perhaps, of a potential that had always been present and had simply been misrouted. "You should have been doing this all along," the old woman said. "I know," Adaeze said simply. She began studying at night, sitting at the small table in the parlor after dinner with Auntie Ngozi's reading lamp and her phone, working through online business courses with the same focused intensity she had once applied to learning which wine paired with which occasion in the restaurants of Victoria Island. The skills she had acquired in Madame Chidinma's world, how to present herself, how to read a room, how to speak with authority in spaces where authority was assumed rather than earned, those skills had not vanished. They had simply been serving the wrong master. She began to understand that they could be redirected. She applied for a position as an administrative coordinator at a small logistics company in Aikcha. A real position, with a real job description, for real pay that was modest by Lekki standards and sufficient by every standard that actually mattered. She went to the interview in an outfit she assembled carefully from what she still owned, not designer, but well-chosen, well-pressed, worn with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows that presentation is not about the label but the intention behind it. She got the job. She called Auntie Ngozi from the bus on the way home. The old woman laughed, a real, full, generous laugh that Adaeze had not heard from her in months, and said she was making pepper soup that evening. It was, Adaeze thought, riding the bus back to Izel-Iko through the loud and beautiful and impossible city, the best news she had delivered to anyone in 2 years. Because it was true. Because it was hers. Because no one had arranged it for her or handed it to her or attached conditions to it. Because the version of herself that had earned it was the real version, and the real version, it turned out, was more than sufficient. She found the engagement ring on a Tuesday evening, 4 months after moving into Auntie Ngozi's compound. She had been reorganizing her bag, a practical, unromantic task, and her hand closed around the small envelope before she remembered what was in it. She held it for a moment without opening it, the way you hold something you know has weight before you are ready to account for the weight. Then she opened it. The ring sat in the envelope, as serious and as silent as it had always been. The diamond caught the parlor lamp the way it had caught the harbor lights on the boat, scattered, indiscriminate, illuminating everything and committing to nothing. She turned it in her fingers. She thought about the boat, the saxophonist, the way Chief Emeka had looked at her across the candle-lit table with those sharp, amused eyes and told her he wanted her to be his properly, and how the word properly had felt like an arrival when it had actually been a more elegant version of the arrangements that had preceded it. She thought about Mrs. Nneka in the skincare shop. Leave while leaving is still a choice. She thought about the bathroom floor in Mushin at 3 in the morning, looking at a face she no longer recognized in a cracked mirror. She thought about her mother's voice. "I knew, Ada. A mother always knows." She held the ring and she let herself feel all of it without managing it, without finding something to attend to, without turning away from the discomfort of a full accounting. The regret was real. The shame was real. The grief for the time spent, for the girl who had arrived in Lagos hungry and bright and aimed herself at the wrong fire, that grief was real, and it deserved to be sat with, not managed. But underneath it, and this was what surprised her, sitting in the small parlor under Auntie Ngozie's lamp with the ring in her palm. Underneath all of it was something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten its texture. Herself. Not the performed version. Not the curated mystery at rooftop parties. Not Chief Emeka's Ada. Not Madame Chidinma's project. Not the village girl trying to approximate a life she had seen through glass. Simply herself, Adaeze Okonkwo from Aguda, with high cheekbones and large quiet eyes and an intelligence that had always been hers and had always been enough, and had simply needed, for a time, to be lost in order to be properly found. She closed her hand around the ring. She made a decision. The next morning she visited a jewelry shop, not in Lekki, not in Victoria Island, but a reputable dealer on Lagos Island that Auntie Ngozie's neighbor had recommended. She sold the ring. She did not negotiate dramatically. She accepted a fair price for it and walked out with an envelope of cash that represented the last material trace of a chapter she was closing. She divided the money into 3 portions without deliberation because she had already decided what she would do with it. The first portion she sent to her mother in Aguta, not as a guilt offering, not as compensation, but as a daughter's contribution, honestly earned through an honest transaction, arriving without a fabricated story attached to it. The second portion she put into a small savings account she had opened at a commercial bank near the logistics company, the beginning of something, small and real. The third portion she used to pay for a professional certificate course in business administration that she had been looking at online for 3 weeks, running her eyes over the curriculum late at night after dinner, as if memorizing a map. She told Auntie Ngozi what she had done that evening over dinner. The old woman listened. She nodded slowly. She said nothing for a moment, turning her fork in her food thoughtfully. Then she said, "The ring was never yours, Ada. It was borrowed trouble. Now that it's gone, you can start collecting things that actually belong to you." Adaeze looked at her aunt, this woman who had been here, steadily, quietly, with her Bible and her sewing machine and her uncomplicated love. Waiting without condition through every Sunday call that arrived with lies embedded in it, and felt the full weight of what it meant to have been returned to have a place to come back to be known before the performance and after the performance and through all the difficult space in between. "Auntie," she said, thank you for not closing the door." Auntie Ngozi looked up from her food. Her eyes were bright and direct and full of something simple. "What door?" she said. "There was never a lock." 8 months after arriving at Auntie Ngozie's compound with 1 bag and a broken face, Adaeze returned to Aguda. She went on a Thursday morning, traveling with a small weekend bag and an envelope of money for her mother, and the particular feeling of someone who is returning to a place not in defeat, but in arriving, finally, at something rather than running from it. Her mother was at the roadside when the bus pulled in, the way she always was when Ada came home, as if she had simply been standing there the whole time, waiting with the patience of a woman who understood that her daughter would find her way back when she was ready and not a moment before. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Her mother's hands on her back were exactly as she remembered them, strong, familiar smelling of palm oil, and the particular soap she had used for as long as Adaeze could remember. The hands of someone who had been working since before the sun every morning for 20 years and had never once asked to be celebrated for it. "Let me see your face," her mother said finally, stepping back, holding Adaeze's face in both hands. The skin had continued to improve over the 8 months. It was not entirely what it had been before. There were places where the texture retained a faint memory of what had come through it, small traces that certain lights revealed. But it was largely healed. More than the physical healing, what her mother was reading in her face was something else. A settledness, a quality of presence, the particular look of a person who has stopped running and started standing. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "There you are," she said softly, as if Ada had simply been temporarily misplaced and had now been returned to her proper location. "Here I am," Adaeze said. They went inside. She spent 4 days in Aguda. She sat in the compound where she had grown up, the half-built structure her father had left behind, now more weathered, the rain having continued its patient work. She sat with her mother in the evenings and told her slowly more of the story than she had given on the phone. Her mother listened the way she had always listened, fully, without interruption, without dramatizing what she heard. When Adaeze finished, she simply said, "God is faithful, even when we are not." She visited her father's grave on the second day. She sat beside it for a while without a particular agenda, simply present. She told him, quietly, that she had made a mess of some things but was building something now, that she was working, that she was becoming someone who would not need to be ashamed. She did not know if the dead received such reports, but it felt important to give it regardless. On the last evening, sitting outside as the Aguda sky went through its extraordinary performance of orange and gold and deep settling blue, she looked at the lake she had grown up beside, silver, wide, patient, and felt the clarity that had been building in her for 8 months arrive, finally, in its full form. Not the false clarity of the boat in Lagos Harbor, with its orchids and saxophone and borrowed promise. Not the feverish clarity of Madame Chidinma's world, where everything was lit and purposeful and leading somewhere that turned out to be nowhere. But the real thing, slower, less spectacular, and permanent in the way that only things rooted in truth can be permanent. She understood some things, sitting by the lake as the sky changed. She understood that she had not been uniquely foolish. She had been young and hungry in a city that had perfected the art of feeding hunger with things that do not nourish. She had not been the first, and she would not be the last, and the shame belonged not only to her, but to the architecture of a world that positions certain young women as available for that particular kind of consumption. But she also understood, and this was the part she did not want to soften with easy absolution, that she had made choices, real choices, with real information available to her at the time of making them. Mrs. Nneka had stood in a skincare shop and offered her a clear-eyed account of exactly what she was walking into, and she had laughed. Her own instincts, on the night of the boat and the ring, had registered something, some quiet internal alarm, and she had pressed it down because the champagne was good, and the diamond was serious, and the desire to have arrived was stronger than the wisdom to wait. She had chosen, and the consequences had been real. She did not want to ununderstand that. She did not want to find a version of the story in which she bore no responsibility, because the version in which she bore responsibility was also the version in which she had agency, in which the future was something she was capable of shaping, rather than something that simply happened to her. She was not a victim of Lagos. She was a woman who had learned something in Lagos, at considerable cost, with considerable pain, that she would carry forward as intelligence rather than bitterness. That was the choice available to her now, what to make of what had happened. Bitterness was one option. It was available, it was understandable, and it would cost her the rest of her life if she chose it. Clarity was the other option. Harder, less immediately satisfying, requiring the ongoing work of someone who has decided to build rather than simply to survive. She chose clarity. She watched the lake until the sky was fully dark and the stars came out over Aguda, and she breathed the air of the place she came from, unhurried, wide, unimpressed by wealth or performance or borrowed diamonds. And she let it remind her of what she was made of, before Lagos, before Madame Chidinma, before the boat and the ring and the bathroom floor in Mushin. She was made of this, of her mother's hands and her father's unfinished walls and the lake that had always been there, of the intelligence that her teachers had noticed and her hunger had temporarily hijacked, of something stubborn and survivable that had refused, even in its worst moments, to be fully extinguished. That was hers. It had always been hers. No one had given it to her, and no one had managed to take it away, not Chief Emeka with his penthouse and his velvet boxes, not Madame Chidinma with her red Mercedes and her patient curation, not the illness that had come for her face, not the friends who had evaporated when the circuit stopped serving them. She was still here, intact in the ways that mattered, building slowly in the ways that lasted. She was 25 when she sat for her first professional certification examination in business administration. She passed with a score that made her course instructor send her a personal message of congratulation. She was still at the logistics company in Adaeze, but she was no longer the administrative coordinator. 6 months in, she had quietly reorganized their client filing system, identified a revenue leak in the billing process that had been bleeding money for 2 years without anyone noticing, and presented her findings to the director in a 2-page document that was precise, well-structured, and, as the director later told a colleague, the kind of thing you expect from someone with 10 years of experience, not someone who joined us 6 months ago. She was made junior operations manager. The salary was modest by the standards of the world she had briefly inhabited. It was entirely, completely, permanently hers. She had moved out of Auntie Ngozie's compound, not far, just 3 streets away, into a small 1-bedroom she paid for herself with money she had earned. She visited her aunt every Sunday. The Bible was still on the sewing table between the scissors and the measuring tape. Some things should not change, and this was one of them. She sent money home to Adaeze every month. The same amount, reliably, the first week of every month. Her mother had used the early contributions to repair the zinc roof. The rain no longer came in. Her face was healed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the way of things that heal when the conditions that cause the damage are genuinely removed. Gradually, steadily, until one morning she stood at the mirror in her small 1-bedroom and looked at herself and saw, without the accompanying shock of non-recognition, simply her own face. Her actual face. High-cheeked, brown-skinned, large-eyed, carrying the very faint traces of what it had been through the way certain landscapes carry the evidence of weather, not as damage, but as history. She thought sometimes about Chief Emeka, not with longing, and not with the consuming bitterness that had been available to her and that she had chosen to set down. She thought of him the way you think of a place you visited that taught you something difficult and important, with a kind of clear-eyed acknowledgement of what it had cost and what it had returned. She had heard, through no deliberate searching, that he had found someone else, another young woman, younger than Adaeze had been, who wore the things he gave her and attended the events and traveled to Abuja as his personal assistant. She had heard this and felt, surprising herself, primarily a quiet sorrow for the young woman, not superiority, not satisfaction. Sorrow and the small, useless wish that someone with clear eyes and quiet dignity would find a moment in a skincare shop to tell her the truth, and that this time the truth would be received. Madame Chidinma she did not think about often. There was less to think about. Madame Chidinma had been honest about what she was, in her way, and the transaction had been clear-eyed even if Adeeze's eyes had chosen not to see it clearly at the time. She bore her no particular malice. She simply did not belong in the life she was building, and lives under construction have no room for materials that weaken the foundation. Mrs. Nneka, Duru she thought about more than she expected to. She thought about her in the skincare shop, the linen tunic, the single gold chain, the extraordinary stillness of a woman who has nothing to prove and everything already decided. She thought about the clarity of what she had said, the generosity of saying it at all, the grace of the exit, unhurried sandals on marble, no drama, no vindication required. She had written Mrs. Nneka a letter. Not delivered, she had no address, no contact, no reasonable mechanism by which to send it. But written, in the small hours of a Tuesday morning in her 1-bedroom, because there are things that need to be said regardless of whether they can be transmitted. Things that need to exist in language even if they exist nowhere else. She had thanked her. She had acknowledged that she had been laughed at and that the laughter had been undeserved. She had said that the words in the skincare shop had eventually, not immediately, not cleanly, but eventually, found their way into her and done their work. She had said that she understood now what it costs a woman to offer grace to someone who is actively causing her harm, and that she hoped Mrs. Nneka Duru had peace. The real kind, the built kind, the kind that does not depend on what anyone else does or fails to do. She folded the letter. She put it in the same drawer where the ring had once lived, before the ring became money, and the money became a course, and the course became a certification, and the certification became a life she was building with her own hands and her own name. She was 25. She was working. She was healing. She was learning every day the difference between fast food and a proper meal. She was, for the first time since she had crossed the bridge into Lagos, with her face pressed against the bus window and her eyes bright with the fire of the city. She was genuinely, quietly, substantially fine. Not the performed fine of a woman managing her image at a rooftop party. Not the desperate fine of a woman in a lecky flat waiting for a call that has stopped coming. The real thing, small, unglamorous, and completely her own. The lake at Aguda had always been there. The stars over it had always been there. She had simply needed to go all the way to the bottom of something before she remembered how to look up. Adaeze's story is not unique. In cities like Lagos, in cities everywhere, there are young women who arrive hungry and bright-eyed and find themselves fed things that look like nourishment and are not. The fast life has always been skilled at resembling the good life, and the difference between them is rarely visible until the cost arrives, and the cost always arrives. But her story is also not hopeless. That is the part that matters most. Because she came back. Not immediately, not without cost, not without scars that certain lights still find. But she came back to herself, and that return, that choice to build something real on something true rather than to keep performing in a borrowed story, that is not a small thing. That is everything. Fast money without integrity is a loan with no disclosed interest rate. The repayment terms arrive later, and they are always heavier than the original amount. But integrity, built slowly on honest ground, with the hands you were born with, that compounds quietly in the dark, the way real things grow. And one morning you wake up, and the roof no longer leaks. And the face in the mirror is your own. And the life you are living is one that no one can reclaim. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. These stories are real, they are among us, and they deserve to be told. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories from Luxury True Stories. We'll see you in the next one.